Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our seventh Tornado Huddle meeting. You see, I'm sporting a little bit of my Meade County green today. I saw, Joe Henderson from Mayfield and I, we both mutually agreed that neither of us were at the game. So there's nothing to see there, but my green waves did come through. Let's go ahead and jump in to just updating on some processes and things that we've got underway here. I see that we've got Robin on. Maybe Robin, you could talk some about the SAFE Fund and where that is, and then we could introduce our friends from the Department of Defense and how that fund, which has a little more flexibility than the funds we have and is a larger amount, how that might be able to help stabilize some of the impacts that we're seeing with districts. And then I'd like for us to talk a little bit about what funding for next year and possibly the year after that look like, and how we really have stability for funding for next year, but it's the year beyond that is what we really would need the legislature to work on, and see if Brian Perry's got any information on any of that working through the legislature. So that, I think, is the agenda I considered for today. Robin, let me turn things over to you to sort of lead us through the SAFE funds and our friends from Military Affairs.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you to all that are joining us today. As you know, at each of our huddles, we talk about the SAFE funds and application process. Those applications are still out online for you to apply and kind of give us sort of the broad perspective of how you've been impacted financially and how we can help in that regard. So we have received applications from 5 districts to date. So thank you for those districts that have already submitted. And we are looking forward to receiving additional ones from other districts as you see them. We do have, so that's out of the $30 million pot that KDE will be administering. Remember, that is primarily for 3 buckets of funding that you might need assistance from. And we have invited our friends from Kentucky Emergency Management to join us today, because as we've talked about eligible funding relief that might be available, we've talked about it really in 2 pots, the $30 million that KDE is administering, and then there's another pot, a larger pot of money that Kentucky Emergency Management is administering. I have communicated by email with Stephanie Roby and Jessica Mitchell, and they are joining us online via telephone. And I asked them to really come on and talk about the process for their pot of money and how that's going to work, what that's going to look like. And so our local school districts will be apprised of how they can apply for those potential funds at this time. So Stephanie, if you and Jessica are on, I'll turn it over to you to kind of speak with our districts.
Thank you so much. I'll start out by saying that, there are very specific sections of this bill that identify how the education pot of money is to be used. However, I don't think that excludes the districts from seeking funding outside of that education pot. The bill speaks to the fact that you have to be a FEMA applicant. So in keeping with that, about a week and a half ago, we pushed out an application to every FEMA applicant that we had for this disaster declaration. So if your district had applied for funding under Disaster 4630, your applicant agent would have received a copy of the House Bill 5 and also the application to apply for the non-education portion of the allotment. I will tell you that in spite of the fact that that looks like a lot of money that's going to be available, to date we have 17 applicants, and the requests total over $250 million. So obviously, there's going to be a tough decision tree that's going to have to be developed we don't want to be in a position where funds are awarded to any applicant, be it schools or cities or counties. We don't want to award funds that FEMA considers to be a duplication of benefits, and then FEMA not provide funding for those particular activities or expenses. We learned in a declaration last year where a school district had received some disaster-related funding from the School Facility Construction Commission, and when FEMA looked at the project associated with those the funding that the commission had awarded, they did deobligate the funding and said in their estimation it was a duplication of benefits. So there's a team of entities working together to try to protect everyone from this issue. We have several lawyers from DLG, from the governor's office. We have the state budget director, the finance cabinet. There are all sorts of entities that are collaborating and then consulting with FEMA to ensure that we maximize all resources. We don't want to pay for something that ultimately could be paid for by FEMA. We don't want to jeopardize that position. So on this particular House Bill 5 issue, if your district applied for FEMA funding, I would encourage you to take a look at the application that was pushed out. And if you have things that you desire funding for that are in keeping with the language of House Bill 5, please submit those. There is an address on the application form. They can be scanned and mailed to pa.help@ky-em.org. Changing gears just a little, since I have a captive audience, FEMA recently has changed its mind regarding expenses that schools incurred because of COVID. We are trying to work with all of the schools that had originally applied for COVID funding. If in fact you have not been made aware of this and you do have a FEMA application for COVID funds, please reach out to us. Again, use this address I just gave, pa.help@ky-em.org. They have loosened the funding dramatically regarding COVID screenings and PPE and testing and cleaning and disinfection. There are a lot of things that they are now willing to pay 100% on. So far in working this issue, we've been able to assist 39 schools recoup $4.3 million. So I encourage you, again, if you have COVID charges that you were originally told would not be eligible, let's take a look at it and get you some money. And if you have questions, I'm here.
Thank you very much for that information. I'm sure we'll have follow-up questions just as district starts to navigate that. We'll stop here and see if any of our staff from KDE, Robin, you or your team have any follow-up questions, or if any of our district leaders are on, have any questions about any things that have been raised.
I'll let the districts go first. I do have a couple of questions, but I'll let our districts go first if they have any questions. So Stephanie, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know one of the questions that I've been receiving from districts is they have concerns about lost revenues that they may be experiencing. Our school districts receive local revenue throughout the year. And obviously, with the damage and destruction of the tornadoes of property, it's going to make those assessment amounts go down. And so one of the questions they have, and as I look at House Bill 5, there is broad language. While it does say assistance to support disaster recovery and relief needs of local school districts, comma, including but not limited to. That's always the phrase that I love to see in legislation because it lets you be a little more flexible. But including but not limited to financial support for districts that will experience the default in bond payments and financial support to assist school districts with building needs. So my question is not related to either one, but rather to this concern of our local districts of lost revenue. So I wonder if you could kind of speak to that. I am putting you on the spot. So if it's one thing that we need to come back to, we're happy to do that at a later date with you that continue that discussion. But I know that is one area that we've had a lot of interest expressed from our districts.
Well, I too love that phrase because it certainly allows you to get creative in your determination. I will say that lost revenue is certainly something that FEMA will never consider. In fact, that terminology is expressly prohibited by FEMA. So I would suggest that, again, the pool of money is not adequate for all of the wishes, but we have to, I think you have to ask if you have made lost revenue determinations, then I think it's important that an application be submitted. And I would suggest on lost revenue calculations that in the application, give an idea as to how you came to that determination. You know, what was your process of identifying a number? We don't expect it to be exact, just logical.
I believe our districts can certainly do that. We've already been talking with them, and they've been communicating with their PA. So I think that we can do that. And as I heard you describe, you want to make sure that it's not for items that FEMA would potentially reimburse. Lost revenue seemed like one of those that would not fall into that category, might be more eligible from this fund.
I'm sorry, the system muted me. Can you say that again?
I was just saying that as we think of items that FEMA would not reimburse, because we don't want to get into that duplication of reimbursements, lost revenue not being an eligible item of FEMA seemed like one that might be more appropriate for reimbursement from this fund.
I would think so. I mean, again, we're working closely with FEMA, but FEMA can be very myopic, and we aren't hopeful that they're going to budge on much. So I think to focus on something that they expressly forbid to begin with is a good approach.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from our districts?
Robin, would it be possible for us to put some of this, pull some of this information together in writing and send it to our tornado impacted districts in an email, just so they've got the information to refer back to?
Sure. We'll take the information that Stephanie has provided today and make sure that those that aren't on the call, that we can send something to them. They'll have that as well. Perfect.
Thank you very much. Any other updates from your office, Robin, on safe funds or other things that we've talked about so far?
I guess I could, I don't know if Brian Perry is on the call. He might want to give us, if he's on, he might want to give us a little bit of legislative update, because there's a little bit of movement as far as the disaster day bill. I know that that's getting ready to be heard. So let me turn it over to Brian and see if he can update us a little bit.
Let's do that. And then Robin, I would like for you to talk a little bit about what funding for next year and potentially the year beyond that might look like.
Okay.
Good afternoon. So there's a couple of updates from the legislative side. So first, You probably heard that the Senate released their budget proposal this morning and voted that out of committee. So we will likely see that move off of the floor of the Senate here pretty quick. After that, they will go into conference where they'll hammer out the final budget. I have not had a chance to look at the Senate proposal yet, but I think that the final enacted budget will include some sort of seek freeze for the tornado districts. But I don't know if that's, yes.
Hey, Brian, I've had a chance to look through the Senate version that came out today. It was a very quick review since it did just come out this morning, but I do not see the seek freeze.
And so that'll be moving. That's the bill that'll provide 15 disaster relief days for impacted districts and count those as contract days. So those are kind of the things that are happening right now. I also mentioned that Senator Howell has 2 shell bills for tornado relief that he has filed. So the filing deadline for new bills has passed, but he filed what we typically call shell bills. So these are just bill jackets that he can sub in with a committee of sub and make pretty much whatever he wants. I say this to say that if we become aware late, there's 17 days left, so we're pretty late now. But if we become aware of anything that they have missed or we need to try to get done before the end of session, those 2 bill jackets are out there. So please let us know if something's been missed that we need to try to go back and get them to address before the end of session. So.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Any questions or feedback for Brian before we hand things back over to Robin? Just for any prognostication about what next year is going to look like, given what we know right now. Things, of course, can change if the legislature changes them.
So, Commissioner, my apologies. I'm having a little bit of technology issues here, and I see Tony and Matt have both put in the chat. We are too. We're all here at the Sauer Building, and we're kind of going in and out. But the commissioner had asked me to kind of recap where we are as far as funding, and of course, we're going to continue to advocate for that seek freeze for the future. But just as a reminder, where we are on funding from the state level as far as seek. We are frozen for 1 more year, starting with the next school year. That's based upon that 18-19, 19-20 data that you all picked. So it'll really be the next year. There is continued concern, of course, of your local revenue. And that's what we just finished talking about is that potential lost revenue that you may not be collecting as anticipated. So I think that's probably the primary concern, that we're still trying to find some other avenue, whether it be through legislative relief or through the funding that might be available for emergency. And I'm sorry, I'm still having technical difficulties here.
We were able to get most of that, Robin.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's the updates that we have. District folks that are on, are there any other follow-up questions that you have or things that you want to talk about that we haven't had a chance to touch on so far?
Commissioner?
Sure, go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, thank you for having this. I guess mine may be for Brian Perry. You know, I appreciate him talking about HB 397 potentially getting voted out. What kind of timeline are we looking at potentially where we would actually know one way or the other? Graduation dates, that sort of thing is a big deal, and we're getting a lot of push now. When may that happen, especially as the weather seems to not be hopefully, maybe this weekend. But any idea on when we may know something?
Sure. So I actually just put in the chat, so education meets today or tonight when they adjourn. And then Senate education actually meets tomorrow morning. So House Bill 397 will get voted out of committee tomorrow morning. 11:30 Eastern. And let me see, I was just looking up to see if it's had any other readings. So it is not, they have not given it readings on the floor of the Senate yet. So it'll take it a few days to get through the Senate. But I would imagine that early next week we'll see that one move off. We can reach out to Leader Thayer and see if he has that on his radar, and if they're planning on hearing it sooner rather than later, and let him know what the concerns are.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Superintendent Davis. Any other questions that you have for any of the KDE staff or the FEMA staff that are on? Okay, well, hearing none, we'll be sure and follow up with that information in writing that you heard from Military Affairs today. We'll share that out so that you have that information to refer to and can work off that. I think let's go ahead and schedule another one of these in a couple of weeks where we can get together and check in again and just see where things are. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, thanks, Stephanie and Jessica, for being with us today.